Welcome into the Inside Bassmaster podcast. And as we are talking about, this is mid-September for the Inside Bassmaster podcast. And this is our pattern of the month episode. And for Kyle, Jessie, and I, we are here for every episode, and we get to talk to anglers about how they break down different bodies of water, different times of the year. And so for this month, Kyle, I think we both came to a conclusion when I texted you throwing out ideas of who we wanted to do. We were like, why don't we talk to Brandon Cobb? Because he seems to always do well. When it gets tough, he manages to do well. So he's our guest for the September Pattern of the Month episode.
Absolutely. And I imagine we're probably going to get into some Topwater talk, but watching Brandon have some success when I was in college and in high school, even throwing a Topwater around these times of the year is something that I always looked up to. So I'm interested to hear some of his insights. So Brandon, welcome to the show.
Hey, thank y'all for having me on. Yep. This time of year, August, September fishing is probably my favorite the whole year.
It's hard because there's fish doing everything. We kind of like there's fish doing everything, but there's fish doing nothing. You can't just go and sit on a shallow area and catch them. You got to cover a lot of water, and some of those offshore spots that paid off a month ago, those fish are so broken up. You know, they're here one day, gone the next. So how do you kind of approach that mindset wise from an early morning takeoff through a 3 p.m. check-in?
Yeah, so I mean, I would classify the fishing in most parts of the South in September as bad. But with that being said, it can be really, to me, it's not that they're not biting. It's like you said, it's just that it's not March when you're going to pull up on a point and find a 200 on one point. They're biting, but they're everywhere. Like you said, some are getting out in the middle of lake schooling, some are running the bank looking for bluegills, some are running back in the creeks where the shad are going. So you kind of gotta, like, I've done well in September doing all three of what I just mentioned, but you've got to decide, are you more that, offshore type guy that likes to target those roam around fish? Because a lot of fish on every lake, pretty much in the South, they start schooling in September, and used to, that was really challenging because you had to wait for them to school, literally. But now with front looking sonar, you can kind of catch them when they're not schooling or know where they're about to school. So that's a little bit different, but that's one option. And the option you've probably seen me do the most success with in that time of year, like in the Forest Wood Cup and stuff, is a lot of the bigger fish. I would say the biggest population stays out and starts following bait around. But the bigger fish will get up and eat brim, like wolf packing, swimming the bank, just up shallow. And it's kind of like a 5-6 bite a day, if you're lucky, type deal. But the big ones, I love to run the bank with a buzz bait or popper or any type of topwater. But when you're doing that, it's almost, there's no pattern to it. There's no anything. You got to find an area you like. I'm not saying like stay in the same area, but like a 5-mile section of lake and fish it all. Just run down the bank with topwater. Then you also got a lot to go to the creeks, and some lakes have a bunch of good creeks, some don't, but always some baits starting in September to go back in the creeks, and you can just typical, fish wood, shallow wood, and just get in the area. So it's a very interesting time of year. It's good when you find them, but there's just not a lot anywhere, in my opinion.
Well, let's talk about that a little bit. Obviously, you mentioned the schooling aspect of it.
Yeah.
That's something I wanted to get into because, like you said, for most places in the South, you look at August and September, at least in my experience, and most people, it's really about the worst time of the year to fish as far as getting bites, figuring out a pattern, things of that nature. But this is one of the times of the year where schooling fish, it might be the best time of the year to do that. It's very inconsistent. Obviously, it's hard to do that for multiple days, but let's just say the forward facing, let's take that part out of the equation for now. Where are some of the places you like to ride around and try to look, whether you're practicing, just fun fishing, some of the type, places that you're going to go to first to see if there's any schooling activity?
Yeah. So the schooling thing that usually starts in September, it's real different on a variety of lakes, because if you got herring, like a lot of my lakes do here, that's a little different than lakes with thread fins, because the herring lakes is the whole cane pile thing. The fish suspend on vertical structure and you call them up, which that's a whole can of worms. That's a herring specific lake thing in general. But I would say all lakes, not even Hartwell, some of it, a lot of them still school on thread fins. And to look for those areas of that, there's kind of two ways you tend to find them. Like I found it at Murray, Hartwell, Clarks Hill, all these herring lakes, you'll find like one point that the fish just roam around all day. And the only way to find that is essentially just, run points and until you find the area they're schooling. But when you do see a few schooling, you got to pay attention of, was that a fish schooling, or is that an area that you sit and they school every 30 minutes all day? But the other side of that is that's like main lake type points, humps, like shoal type situations. But a lot of the bait's also starting to move back into the creeks, and you can be pretty consistent on a lot of lakes in the South by going. Some of the bait will go to the very back of the creeks, but not always. A lot of times in August, September, the fish or the bait will be like halfway back in creeks, and you'll find them schooling pretty consistently, where what I say it changes from lake water to creek water, which is usually like if you say a 5 to 10 mile long creek, it'll start getting a little stained up, halfway to the back. They're still 20, 30 foot deep on most lakes, but it starts getting a little different. And a lot of the schooling action will happen kind of in that change. So it's kind of unique, but the point thing is probably the most consistent if you're looking for threadfin schoolers, like taking out herring. But it's kind of one of those things of just making sure you'll see it throughout the day, but make sure is that an area you want to wait, or was that one fish schooling, or is that, if nothing else, catch a couple when they're schooling and sit there and eat a sandwich and wait for 30 minutes, see if they do it again. That's like one of the ways you find it sometimes.
So you're saying when you see a guy with an empty loaf of bread at the end of the day and he's throwing it in the trash can, that he's probably been one who's going to have some schooling fish. That's what you're saying.
Maybe so. That's the way to do it. So many times, I can't tell you how many times that I've been running down the lake in the fall, this time of year, like Hartwell or somewhere, and seen one fish come up. I'm like, oh man, one fish just came up. And I just put the trolling motor down to throw at that one fish because, if I'm fun fishing, I'm just try to catch that one that was blowing up. Well, over the next hour, they'll just consistently do that every 1 minute, 5 minutes, something like that. So it's kind of one of those things, if you're not, you just got to keep your eyes out the whole time, because usually it is around some type of topography. Very rarely is it on nothing. It's usually on like I call it landmark places. I'm not talking like a point that's just a point you pull up and fish. I'm talking about like a half-mile long point that's real wide, like a landmark, not a, individual, like one cast type point. It's usually a bigger area.
Yeah, they're going to need something to be on if they were on a skinnier, longer point. They're going to have to have somewhere to go back to. Otherwise, it's that expansive place. But you mentioned it. You can either go and catch fish offshore, schooling fish that are probably going to group up similar size, 1.5 to 2.5, maybe 3 pound fish schooling out there. Or you go up shallow and throw a buzzbait or a frog or a popar and go and catch, the bigger fish, but you're only going to get 5 of those bites. How does Brandon Cobb decide? Because everyone with 5 fish format, you want the biggest fish possible, but how easy it is to go catch 2 of those. And just because you can get 5 bites a day doesn't mean you're going to land all 5 of those. So going back and forth between, do you go target your one kicker of the day early in the morning, the first hour or 2, or do you go get 3 or 4 fish, maybe a limit offshore, and then try to cull 1 or 2 of those out the rest of the day? Do you kind of hop back shallow and deep throughout the day? Is there a key window? Because people would expect early morning and maybe late afternoon for that up shallow deal, but it's kind of, you could probably pick an hour, throughout the day that would be good as well.
Yeah, it's definitely shallow. You always can get one early in the morning, but a lot of times there's like, I would call a good window shallow fishing this time of year between like right at daylight. It's not that good sometimes, but it's usually like 8:30 to 10:30. And one thing I like put that up to is the fish like to bite early, but they need a little light, is my opinion. And then as it gets brighter throughout the day, generally boat traffic gets up. And a lot of people, they don't think about boat traffic enough when you're trying to fish shallow all summer, and especially September. There's still a lot of boat traffic on the lake, whether it's other bass fishermen, a big tournament, or pleasure boats. If those fish are up in 1 to 2 foot of water and roaming around or looking for brim or something, if 2 foot waves come and crash on the bank 7 or 8 times, they're going to pull off the bank and not be up there anymore. So usually like 8 to 10:30 is kind of your window where the sun's up enough, but the boat traffic's not pounded the banks yet, especially like where a lot of the tournaments this time of year, are the Bassmaster opens, and you're talking 150 to 225 boats. So with that being said, a lot of the main lake type banks and things like that get waves pounded on them all day, which just sucks for a shallow bite. So it's the timing window. But a lot of times the way I decide like what I'm gonna do, you're talking about kind of mixing up or deciding, like you specifically like an open a few years ago at Hartwell, or 2 years ago. I think it was September, late September, early October, something like that. I like to fish shallow, but there was literally no fish on the bank. So I never I top 10 that open. I think we talked some during it, and I fished offshore the whole time, schooling fish. I love to fish shallow on Hartwell, and I literally never had a bite. So it's kind of one of those things that you got to practice and figure out which one you think is. It's not, both don't always work, is what I'm trying to say. So you got to figure out what you think most of the fish are doing that specific time.
Sticking with the shallow bite this time of year, something that I think most people may overlook is, obviously we were talking about how it's a deal where you're not going to get a whole lot of bites. I mean, 5 bites a day, 6 bites a day, 7 bites a day at max sometimes. And I know Ronnie fishes like this. I fish like this personally. Like, I like to do the shallow deal as well. And I think one thing people don't really quite understand is like the mindset that it takes to do that. Because if you're going to do that, you really have to put your head down and just do it and go, like you mentioned. Talk a little bit about your mindset, when to stay, when to go, things like that, because it really is a grind. So talk about that.
Yeah, the problem with the shallow thing is, like, I think what a lot of people, what makes them not like put much credit to it or want to do it this time of year is very rarely are you pattern fishing like you would in the spring or something. Like, let's say you pull up, you're like, oh, I just caught one on a buzz bait on the back of this pocket. So you're like, oh, I'm going to run the back of pockets. Well, that usually doesn't work this time of year. It's more so you might catch one off the walkway of this dock. You might catch one off a laydown. Then you might be going around a little bluffy bank to go to the next dock because you thought they were on docks. So you catch one off the bluffy bank. It's one of those things you got to be dumb without being too dumb. You just got to go and do it. And you aren't going to expect to get that many bites, but you also, if you get too keyed in thinking, oh, I got them figured out now, you probably don't, because that's not the nature of September, October fishing. They're everywhere. There's some fish that are still going to be on steep stuff, some fish be on flat stuff, some are around wood and some are around rock. So you really just have to go. I think the key thing that I like to do with it is I'm not looking for a specific cover. I don't refish stuff, but I love to find, like, let's say a big area of the lake, a section of the river, or a section of a feeder on the lake where you're like, I like this 10 miles section. I'm going to fish like most of this, at least all the good looking stuff in this 10-mile section. You don't really want to get to running around over the whole lake trying to fish nitpicky stuff over the whole lake.
Yeah, and we talked about it just before the podcast started, and kind of just remembering, we don't have the Elite Series schedule normally extending into the fall, but in 2020 we did do that, and you led 2 of those 3 fall events before we had the November event, which I would classify early winter when we were at Fork. But when we were at Guntersville, Chickamauga, and Santee Cooper, those 3-week stretch there, you led 2 of those events. I think you led Chickamauga and you led Guntersville. You led Chick, I think, on a frog, and then you led Guntersville on a buzzbait. So when it comes to preparing for a one-day tournament, anglers can be like, perfect, I've got some fish schooling on some points. I know I can probably go up and catch 1 or 2 fish on Topwater up shallow, maybe before boat traffic, like you said. But preparing for a 4-day event, hoping to be there in the running all 4 days, is there, you said get keyed in, but don't get too locked in. How do you balance, I just caught 20 pounds doing this yesterday, and I'm the leader of an event, and I have more uncertainty going out day 2 when they say, how do you think you're going to catch them today? I have no idea. And that's an honest example, or that's an honest statement. So for you, have you felt kind of an ease of like, well, there's no pressure on me because it's fall and I could catch them the same way, or I could catch them different? Or is there a lot of pressure because you don't have a plan that's as fortified?
Yeah, it's definitely, I would say it's more stressful. Like, generally in the spring tournament, you're like, well, I'm leading. I had, 18 pounds a day. I'm going to go catch, like, a bad day tomorrow is going to be 12 pounds at least, or 15. Well, in the fall, it's kind of like, well, I had 18 a day. I might zero tomorrow still. And that's what Guntersville. Chickamauga was a little weird because I found one little grass place that I wouldn't call it typical, like, fishing. It was just, I found a little area in the grass that had them, and I caught them one day, and I knew there was not very many left, and there wasn't. But
those days when you catch them so good like you did, it almost, I already made the day 3 cut because there's no way someone's going to catch 10 pounds a day, and you're like, I could zero. And so I've already, I could be in contention with just a little weight. Yeah.
Yeah. That's what I did in that one. I think I caught 19, 6 pounds, and then zeroed. So, but anyway, so Guntersville, I did what I said don't do at Guntersville. I had one section of lake, I would say, that I was catching them on a buzzbait, just like I said, running down the bank, fishing some wood, stuff like that, just moving. And I essentially fished it out over 2 days. And I was on live, and there was a big frog tournament coming up, and I was on live on day 2, and then day 3, there was 40 boats in the area I was fishing, so that really hurt it. But it's I did what I just told y'all don't do, is rather than just saying, all right, I'm catching them on a buzzbait, running the bank, rather than just going to a new area and trying it somewhere else. I tried to go on day 3. I knew it was getting a little tougher, and I tried to go back to the same area and do it again. And with the other boats in there and the amount of fish I'd already caught, it was like, I mean, when I say area, I'm not, just for people listening, I'm not talking about a 100-yard stretch. I'm talking about 2 to 5 miles, but I'd fished it all. So it was a lot of those single solitary fish I'd already caught. But it's the fall fishing it's so inconsistent. That's why you see, like, in the fall, you'll see a tournament, you're like, man, it only took 39 pounds to win this tournament, but there's still some big bags. It's hard to do multiple days. So the fishing's not bad. It's just random is what it ends up being. So to take advantage of the randomness, you have to cover as much water as possible. And this always, I tell everybody, like, I'm a fast fisherman when it comes to fall fishing specifically. I cover a lot of water, move fast generally, but everybody's always like, man, I just can't catch them in the fall. I run and gun all over the place. And I see people doing that, and run and gun versus fishing fast is completely different. Like, I'll see people pull up, fish 30 yards, take off, run down the lake, fish 30 yards, take off, run down the lake, and fish 30 yards. I'm like, you're not fishing anything. In my mind of run and gun in the fall is you have your trolling motor on 80 and you fish this entire pocket all the way down this bank, around this point, down the next one, until you see what you say, this does not look good. Then you crank up and run till it looks good again and start fishing. You're not fishing key specific stuff.
So let's do some bait talk. Obviously, there's going to be some pretty obvious ones that you're going to throw in there. Obviously, your signature series buzzbait, things of that nature. But let's talk about shallow for now. Talk about your 3 favorite baits to fish shallow, and then maybe some baits that aren't topwaters, because I imagine a topwater is going to be in there pretty heavily. But baits that aren't topwaters, even go outside of your top 3.
Okay.
And, give us a couple of those.
All right. Well, obviously, I'll do, like, there's pretty much only 3 topwaters I ever throw. So I'll just mention those real quick. And that's obviously my buzzbait with greenfish tackle I make with a horny toad on it. I like a horny toad better in the fall. And then I also just a plain horny toad. A lot of times they like just a plain horny toad better. And then my third one would be a Yozuri popper. And I like the 3DB popper. It's a medium-sized popper. It's just a little bit of weight so you can cast it. But that's my 3 topwaters. But I got one bait that's kind of going to be like, what? That's not something that most people throw in the fall. But I love a floating worm in the fall. Me and Ronnie did a video on a floating worm for the spring and methylate. But one thing in the fall, so I throw methylate in the spring, or methylate, I guess it is. In the fall, bruised banana is the color. Bruised banana, black and yellow swirl, or straight yellow. It's like natural, but not natural. And then in the fall, a lot of times when they won't come up and hit a topwater, the shallow fish are really good for that. And the other bait in the fall is you always have to have tied on in September, October is I always have something to pitch. Like, a lot of times, like little brush piles, fish get on shallow wood really, really good in September, October. So anytime you see, like, a lot of people put like little crappie piles, I call them out, like for crappies, in like back of pockets or in front of their docks and stuff, all that stuff gets really, really good in the fall. And I always have a Zoom Z crawl with a 3/8 ounce weight just ready to pitch at anything I see that looks like it might have a fish. But actually, one of the Forest Wood Cup top 10s you mentioned running the bank was with a bruised banana floating worm. So the floating worms definitely get you some extra bites.
Kyle, I've definitely seen a bunch of shad in the fall turn yellow and black for folks who are wanting to know if it matches the hatch. It totally does.
Sherbert's another one. I mean, it's a perfect match for the shad mostly.
I do love that, though, when we talk about throwing a spinner bait or throwing a white horny toad or even like a smoke, things that are really shad based. And then when you can throw that pink or that methylate or that bruised banana, and it's like, it doesn't make sense, but fish just bite that. Right. And so I guess, I mean, there's had to be some kind of trial and error for you to find that out, because it's not something you just normally just do. You had to kind of figure it out.
Well, I've always thrown a floating worm. Like, I mean, I've done videos with you on it. I'm probably one of the few people that still throw it very often, but I've always, like, for years I threw merthiolate a lot, but in the fall it just seems like they're not natural colors because it's yellow and stuff, but there's stuff like it looks like a bluegill with the yellow on their tail and
For
stuff
sure.
like it. The yellow and bruised banana stuff is just like a slightly more natural presentation of the same bait, and it's just always, it's kind of trial and error over the years. We always had around here fishing. I grew up fishing BFLs, and we always had in September, early October BFL, and I can't tell you how many top tens I made on a bruised banana floating worm or yellow floating worm. And it's just something that I've always done, and I just changed the colors, same presentation, same bait, just changed the colors up for the fall.
Kyle, you got something?
I was just going to ask, one, I thought Ronnie's point there was great. I mean, like, who dared you to throw a bruised banana, floating worm in the fall to figure that out? But two, I guess I want to circle back to the schooling fish thing. So obviously we talked a lot about that. Let's go back to your top 3 baits there. And then, one thing that is super true about those schooling fish, by the time you get to September, a lot of those fish are really hard to catch. I mean, they're very educated. They're super smart. Talk about some of, obviously your top 3, and then maybe some of your sneaky baits that you like to throw for the really hard to catch ones.
All right. Yeah. So those schooling fish, it's a little different on some of our lakes because some of them are schooling on herring, but to kind of for both, I use a Yozuri pencil. And this year, it actually just came out this year. Now there's a pencil popper that's a slightly smaller size, and the Yozuri pencil popper. And I use that as like my main topwater, but also I use a Zoom Super Fluke. I think like that opened a few years ago. I caught most of them on a fluke. A lot of times, in my opinion, if you get kind of cloudy, rainy days, it sounds weird, but the fluke works better than a true topwater. And so I'll kind of alternate back and forth between the two. And the third bait to throw is, really, it's when they're schooling that little bait, it's just kind of some type of really small swim bait. I've got a whole bag. It's literally labeled tiny schooling baits. And I just I got some little bitty swim baits, some little grubs, stuff like that. And I always vary between those if they're eating little bait and put it on a spinning rod I actually usually thread it on like a 1/0 hook, like a 1/0 drop shot hook, and thread it on, throw it like that. Just some tiny, 2-inch to 3-inch at most baits. And that's kind of my 3 schooling baits. And I wish I could say a specific one, but I seriously have a bag. It's got everything from some tiny like Zoom meathead drop shot baits that I really like a swim bait, to some 2.8 Kitex, to slider grubs, to crappie jigs. It's got everything in it. You just got to kind of play with it till you find something they'll bite.
So I have a question about that, because obviously in the fall it's tough, but you sometimes see, other than the spring, which is the guaranteed when the fish are biting the best or they're the biggest that they're going to be all year, the fall, it seems like you've seen those people who come in with 3 for 17, and one of them was an 8 and one of them was a 6, and they just couldn't get a limit. And you're like, if you just got 2 more, you win the tournament. So you can catch really big fish in the fall as well. And you can do so on little baits, but you can also do it on big glide baits or big swim baits, maybe a big mag draft or a big Zoom swimmer or things like that. So have you ever experimented the opposite end of the spectrum, when everything is so small and everything is so shad based that you just throw something maybe up shallow or off a point that is just so much bigger than the bait that it's going to get those fish's attention? Especially spotted bass will attack, and you can catch a big spot doing that. But for sure, the largemouth that might be structure oriented and might not chase as much with the schooling aspect that other fish do.
Yeah, I was about to say that. Spotted bass especially. Like I'm not a glide bait guy, and I don't own a mag draft. So I'm not that I don't use them. I've got a bunch of Yozuri Ninja swimmers. Clint's told me, he's like, oh man, you got to throw them in the fall, they're awesome. And I throw one out there, this thing feels dumb. And I'll tell you, actually, this is completely off topic, but the glide bait, I'll tell you what makes me not like a glide bait. At Lake Fork, when I won the tournament at Lake Fork, I knew exactly where they are. I literally could have thrown anything up there to catch one. I would pull up on a point and catch 40 in a row on my jerkbait, my Yozuri jerkbait. I would be like, all right, I'm gonna catch a big one now. I'd pick up the glide bait, throw it up there, freaking nothing, and then I'd pick the jerkbait back up and catch 10 more. So it just got in my head. I just don't like that.
You did catch the big bag on day one at Fork on a soft swimmer, though, right?
I did. A soft
Okay.
swim bait different. I can catch some on a big soft swim bait, but the glide bait, I feel like I'm doing nothing. I throw it out. I'm like, oh, it's got grass or something on it. It's not. I don't feel it right. I don't know. I don't like them. But that being said, I do throw a big topwater a lot in the fall, especially. But we have herring, so it's a little weird. Most of my fall fishing is contributed to Hartwell, Clarks Hill, Murray. It's around here. I mean, that's just where I don't have tournaments much in the fall. So that's where it happens to be. But a lot of times, like a big pencil popper, Yozuri makes a real big one. I used to throw a big saltwater version of the Yozuri pencil popper. It's like 6 inches long a lot. If they're eating herring or big bait, then that's what I do. But the spotted bass, like you said, spotted bass are really dumb for big baits. You might not hook them, but they'll come up and hit it enough times to where eventually you may hook them on a big topwater. Big weight baits are great. Like one of the big things around here in the fall and early pre-spawn is a big wake bait. Like a lot of people around here throw a redfin. It's like a old school big long. It's a jerk bait, but they reel it on top like a wake bait. And big weight bait can be really good too. But
Long
it's not.
A's and
Yeah.
different things like that. Yeah.
Yeah, it's not something I do a lot, but it's definitely something that is an option. I do it more with the big pencil poppers. If I want to call them up, if it's real windy, that helps sometimes.
Well, and the big wake baits, like you said, I think we saw at Carter's Lake in Georgia for the bracket one year in 2018. We saw a redfin come into play, and then you see, at Chattooga in the college championships, you have the big, El Raton rats and stuff. Yep. So for spotted bass, even though you might not hold up that bait in the top lures category or, for the photo gallery, it probably revealed the fish enough for you to be able to catch them on a fluke or something. Like it's the traditional forward facing sonar. It is, I'm going to get them to show themselves because I can't see them out there, off the point by themselves. So
that's right.
That makes sense.
The big and that big glide bait. I have thrown like the Yozuri Ninja Glider a lot around docks. That's the only time I never catch much on it because I don't commit to it. But I'll use it a lot, like on Hartwell. I'll throw it down the side of a dock. If he's there, he's gonna follow it. Like you're gonna see him. And Lake Jocassee up above that, I'll throw it around laydowns a lot. And to use it, it's a good fall bait to see the fish, but you kind of it's kind of like my topwater thing. You gotta go full commitment to catch enough on it, and I have a hard time going full commitment on it.
Now I'm just curious about this myself. Obviously, when you talk about topwaters, cloudy days versus sunny days, you can go into the buzzbait and horny toad, and then also same thing for your 3DB pencil. What do you prefer? Do you prefer the darker colors on dark days? Kind of give us a rundown on color selection when it comes to topwaters.
Yeah, this is a big thing I've learned over the years, especially like cane pile fishing at Hartwell, like topwater fishing, because we do it almost all day in the fall usually.
Sure.
So the schooling fish type thing, I've always had the best luck on a sunny day with a chrome or like a clear chrome. That's what I use in Yozuri. It's called clear, but it's got reflective tape in it. So it's a clear or chrome. And then if it's cloudy, windy, like rainy, like that type, just a nasty day, I use straight bone, just white. And that's kind of the only two I throw. I know they make like all these shad colors, American shad, gizzard shad, blueback herring color. I throw clear, chrome, or white. That's the three colors I throw. And the Fluke is pretty much always like a glimmer blue or white pearl. I don't know that anything that's, shad colored is about the same. And then when you're talking shallow on a buzzbait, that actually does vary some. I wish I could say I had like a straight scenario on when I do what. Generally I throw three colors on a buzzbait, or four colors really. I'll go gray ghost, which is hard to find. Everybody's probably listening to this like, I can't even get gray ghost. But gray ghost, white, every now and then green pumpkin, but that's kind of a rarity, or black. So I'll say that my main ones are green pumpkin, black, gray ghost, and white. And so the black I throw if I think they're eating more bluegills or something like that. A lot of the brim up shallow or bluegills up shallow, they're kind of blackish looking. Sure. And so I throw it a lot when I think they're eating heavy bluegills. When I think it's kind of shad oriented, I throw white. And the time I use gray ghost is if you're on like a clear water situation, like a lake where you want to fish shallow, throw the buzz bait, and you think you need a shad imitation. Sometimes that white just looks like a softball coming back through the water to me. So I'll switch to gray ghost to get the same look, but not quite as intrusive.
Are you fishing the Hartwell Open, Cobb?
I don't think I am. I'm not signed up for it. If there was a need for boaters, I would come do it.
everyone is so excited to hear that. Whenever they hear this podcast, they're going to be like, thank goodness Brandon Cobb's not. So, okay, if you do jump in it, that's fine. But if you don't, what would you expect and how would you break down the fall on Hartwell? It's the first week or so of October. When it comes to the direction of the lake, where at in the region of the lake? You know, we always think about, what is it? The rule of thumb is they will spawn on the north end of a lake quicker. Like we always see the Seneca, and then it's the last place to spawn is at the dam. Some of that is some of that is wind direction. Obviously, a south wind blows into North Creeks, warms them up quicker than maybe even though it's directionally on the bottom. But for the fall, are you going to be in those creek arms at the bottom of the lake or at the top of the lake? Does it necessarily matter for you? Because I know you know Hartwell, and you can kind of give an explanation based off of that with that perspective.
Yeah, Hartwell's a little unique because it's all good essentially. I'm not even mentioning the Tugloo, because the Tugloo is one of the better arms of the lake, but I don't really fish up there. I've literally, I don't think I've ever fished an entire day in a tournament in that arm. But so to mention the rest of the lake, like if you're trying, the Topwater thing is kind of situated to what I would call the round part of the lake. Like it's like there's Hartwell essentially has the 6 and 20 creek and 23 miles, got the Seneca River and Tugloo. So, and they all meet what I call the round part of the lake. And that's kind of where I say the whole school and fish Topwater thing goes down. I mean, that's a big area lake, but it could literally be anywhere there. And as far as like that fall bite on where, like what happens, what the turnover always kind of affects that. What makes on Hartwell specifically, what makes that bite ridiculously good, you actually like that opened the other year, it sucked. It was not what it should have been. A lot of fish were schooling on shad. The herring weren't really up there. And what makes those herring come to the top and the school and bite be really, really good is actually the start of the turnover. If it turns over fully, it's no good. It's like if it starts looking brown and weird, it's too late. But right when that water tries to turn over and it starts pushing up, it also pushes the herring to the top. And that's when that topwater bite's dumb. Like when you see them, every fish you see schooling be schooling on 5-inch long herring, and it's good. The cane piles are always good, and the topwater bite's always good, but it's really good when they're eating herring, not shad. So, but as far as section of the lake, it's or like area, like even if we're just saying that round part, it's kind of one of those things to where it's changes throughout the year. Like I'll fish that whole area, and if I find, like if I catch them really good off a few places, then I try to find everything in that general vicinity. And a lot of that's because that is the best part of the lake. But then a lot of that is that on Hartwell specifically, doing the cane pile thing, it's a lot of people do it differently now because of front looking sonar. Like you can kind of chase those fish around till you get them bite. I don't do that. Like I've mentioned this, that
just ethically, you just don't like to, you don't want to pressure the fish too much. So you just go fish.
No, but even the Topwater thing, see, I grew up learning to do it without it. So it's hard for me to reinvent the wheel and go try to do the school and fish thing with it. I can catch some off of it, but if you look back at that open a few years ago, you know, I finished 9th. It wasn't phenomenal, but I weighed in almost all largemouth, and the whole rest of the top 10 caught spots. And yes, they beat me, but I just wasn't getting quite enough bites. But the reason that is generally those topwater places, when you pull up, you're going to catch them instantly if it's largemouth there. If it's spots, you might have to chase them around, throw a little swim bait, you know, pester them into biting. But if it's largemouth there, they bite like first cast. So it's kind of a different, once I find what I was mentioning about the part of the lake, you have to have enough places where you can run between them without getting spread out over the whole 15, 20 miles, because you might burn all your gas running 10 miles of water. It sounds weird, but you make the loop 17 times, you know, and a lot of times I don't put my trolling motor down. It's kind of hard to use front looking sonar when you don't put your trolling motor down. So it's, but the kind of speed running is what I do with that on Hartwell rather than the front looking sonar. It's just different. It's just the way I grew up doing it. So it's hard for me to try, but I feel like your largemouth spot percentage goes up a lot if you don't spend too long anywhere. Very rarely do you get a largemouth to bite if he didn't bite quick.
Well, and to equate it, it's like the Tennessee River in its heyday, offshore ledge fishing. You pull up to a ledge, your first cast, if you didn't catch one,
you better catch one.
You keep going till you get on a school that's biting. Same thing with those. If you can do that, or you don't have any great docks with, you know, green lights or whatever, then you just got to keep going to point. Kyle, you got anything for Cobb before we let him go?
I do not. That was a super awesome job explaining a lot of the things, like I mentioned earlier, that I know you and I both like to do a lot. And in the South that, you know, you can do it a lot of lengths, really. I mean, the reality of it is, like that Guntersville tournament that he mentioned, everybody was punching and flipping and doing that kind of thing. And then there goes Brandon Cobb still throwing a buzzbait on the bank.
Just running down the bank.
It's
I have one more question. Go ahead.
The problem at Guntersville that time that I ran into is it's hard to do that in grass. And I was having a hard time finding enough areas where you could run the bank that wasn't matted with grass.
no eelgrass.
That's why I ran out of water, because I think I fished the whole area that didn't have grass lining the bank.
You weren't worried about other anglers in your area. You were worried about yourself because you were covering it so much and so frequent. Yeah. We talked about colors, and last thing before I let you go, you talked about a fluke. I grew up in the Carolinas, and I fished a fluke as a topwater. My dad loved throwing it on braid. I threw it on mono, and we actually would get it to flick the surface. But I also know I've grown since then, and I throw it on a fluorocarbon as well, and I get it underneath the surface. I can still make it dart upwards based on how I work it, and you can still see it, but it's still great as a jerk bait. Are there colors that you like? Because I loved Arkansas Shiner. I loved albino, but some guys like watermelon seeds. You know, is there any kind of just, this is the one fluke I'm going to buy 100 packs of when I go to Bass Pro or something? You see it?
Pretty much I only throw two colors. I throw glimmer blue or just pearl. And I generally throw pearl more, and this is going to sound weird, but a pearl fluke, the way they make them, tend to be heavier. So therefore you can cast them better. And the glimmer blue is the same way. You go to an albino, the albino is a laminate color, and it's not near as heavy. They don't cast as good. They're more buoyant. So that's why I stick to the glimmer blue and pearl, just because of the nature of those colors. They tend to be a little bit heavier, and you can throw them better.
Now I know my dad always threw a albino fluke on top because it was more buoyant. So now we know that. But before we let you go, Clemson, Louisiana Tech this weekend. Give me a score prediction if the Tigers are going to take the win.
I mean, I predict that they will take the win, but watching them, I don't think it's going to be real high scoring, because they just can't score that well. I'm going to say, we'll say 30-something to 10.
Okay. The defense will stand up then. I like that.
And also, how many weeks until Cade Klubnik starts for the Clemson Tigers?
It should have been, don't get me started.
Well, I know that
I watched the first game this year. Last year, I didn't hardly watch it because I got so frustrated. Like, I just don't think he's very talented, but he just doesn't have the it that makes a good quarterback.
That's the tough dilemma, but at least Arkansas did y'all a solid last week and beat South Carolina and knocked the Gamecocks down another notch. So I know they'll probably be beat down so much that when they get to the rivalry game, they won't be as jacked up for it.
Yeah, their morale will be down.
Yeah, exactly. Their shirts torn and tattered, but appreciate you, Brandon, joining us for the Inside Bassmaster podcast, the Pattern of the Month episode for September. Basically, the gist that I got from that, summing it up, you better put your spinning rods in like your finesse gear away. Don't worry about drop shots and shaky heads. You can catch them on that, but if you don't lock a topwater in your hand, whether you're off the bank or on the bank, you're probably not fishing for the same caliber fish that Brandon Cobb's fishing. Brandon, appreciate you. Thank you for joining me and Kyle.
Appreciate you having me on.